everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Careers and Coffee. I'm Charlotte, and I'm joined by my fabulous co-host, Lucy Grimwade. And today, and over the next 6 weeks, we wanted to invite you into our coffee catch-up. So, Lucy, first of all, very important question. Do you have your coffee?
I certainly do.
Fantastic. So, Lucy and I often have a coffee catch-up. In fact, when I say often, it's probably every week. And there's obviously coffee, and we always end up talking about careers, whether it's our careers or just general topics around the career space. So we thought, why not share that with you all? So Lucy, what are we going to talk about this week?
Charlotte, this week I really want to talk about redundancies and layoffs. I think we've both seen a lot of stuff on social media from our own experiences as well over the last few years. Redundancies being a really hot topic. And I was doing some research for this conversation that I knew I was going to have today. And on ACAS website, it was reported in May that at least 30% of companies this year are going to go through some form of redundancy. And I thought it'd be a great conversation for us to talk about some resources, share some experiences, and just see where this kind of conversation takes us. So with that in mind, Charlotte, with that 30%, what's your thoughts on that for this year?
I mean, I think that's still below what we saw pre-pandemic. On Sunday, actually, whilst I was advertising our show, I did put a post out and looked at what the Office of National Statistics say. And unfortunately, the redundancy rate has actually increased this quarter. However, overall, employment rate is up. I don't plan to go through all of the stats on this LinkedIn Live. However, if anybody wants to check out those stats and the site they've come from, all the details are found on my post on Sunday. But generally, I think it's a mixed picture. So employment rate is up, but redundancy rate has also increased. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I mean, I know we've talked about this before because you kindly interviewed me on your Talk Female podcast, and I shared my experience. And I think even back then, last year, the figures were probably a bit higher. So I think we're going to go through this now for the next sort of 12 months. So, yeah.
I agree with you saying around it's not all doom and gloom. And I do find it very interesting around some of the content that I read on LinkedIn. As everybody knows, I'm very
Mm-hmm.
big on LinkedIn. I'm always kind of checking it. But I do find it just kind of when looking for like different roles, I'm helping some friends out at the moment looking for some jobs. There is some jobs out there. And I say some, there's a lot of stuff out there. I know the market tends to be, and lots of people are saying, oh, the market's flooded or the market's in a funny place at the moment. But I also think a great thing to think about is although perhaps when going through redundancy or going through a layoff, depending on where you are and where you're based in the world, you've also got to understand as well that some businesses are growing
Yeah.
and there's lots of startups, there's lots of kind of shifts and changes, especially in like technology spaces as well. And I think that I'm seeing a lot more different types of roles coming out. So previously we might apply for things kind of our old job titles, but I
Yeah.
think get job titles out your head a little bit and actually have a look at different types of roles because lots of your experiences will match into this role. And I'm just saying this mainly because I know over the next 6 weeks we're going to talk more about
Yeah.
that. But just to kind of answer your doom and gloom bit there, I do really agree with you. I don't think it is all doom and gloom.
No, and I think that's also really important. And I think we talked about this actually last week, didn't we? And it's like looking for skills and things that you really want to do. I say nice. The nice thing, inverted commas, about redundancy is that you suddenly are given an opportunity to reset and redirect.
Yeah.
And it might give you that kick up the backside to go, you know what? I don't want to carry on doing XYZ job. I want to see what else is out there. I appreciate also, with that being said, that not everyone has the luxury of time to spend loads of time trying to think about what they want to do because everyone's got bills to pay and we're in a cost of living crisis. So but I would say having been made redundant a couple of times now, and spoiler alert for anybody who doesn't know, and I did say this also in the podcast, on average you will be made redundant 3 times in your career. So it's happened to me twice now, so just one more to go. Hopefully not more than that. However, I do think it's a good opportunity to reset and think about what you want to do. And to your point, think about your skills. What are you really good at? But more importantly, what do you enjoy?
Yeah.
Because you can be really good at something but really hate doing it.
Yeah.
So, and as you say, there's some really interesting jobs out there. I don't think that there is a lack of jobs. I think there are a breadth of jobs out there. I think that there are probably less jobs available in certain types of business, but also in certain levels of seniority. And I think it's a broader mix for sure. And also, don't forget that as employees, we're being pickier now because we want to work remotely, or we want to have hybrid working or flexible working. And I'm not saying picky is a bad thing, because I think actually having that choice is great. And so you're already going to reduce the number of jobs when you're like, oh no, I don't want to work in an office full time, for example. So that's also just a factor to think about, because I know there are lots of businesses that are going back to an office, and that suits some people, but it doesn't obviously suit everyone.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I really like what you've just said there about reset and redirect. I think that's something that we can all, I don't know, I really, really like that. I feel like it's actually, if you do find yourself in that situation, before you go and react to because I think Charlotte and I talked about this last week as well, that sometimes when you get in that position and you're made redundant, you're like, oh, crumbs, I need to apply for every single job that's available. Or actually, if you just take that moment to reflect and then reset and then redirect, I actually think that it's going to give you this opportunity that you probably never really had before when you were in your role. Charlotte, I do actually have a question for you,
Oh
and it's
yeah.
probably something that we've covered a little bit on the podcast, but I think there's probably some more that we could dive into here. Do you think there's any myths around being made redundant?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did, you're absolutely right. We did talk about this on the podcast, and I will say this to anybody who wants to listen. But redundancy, as personal as it feels, or being laid off, as personal as it feels, it's not about your performance. It's never about your performance. It's about your role being made redundant, and taking away, and it's really hard to do this, but to take away the personal element and just be like, okay, it's not about me. It's happened to me, but it's my role that's been made redundant, and having that acceptance of that, I think, is really important. That's, for me, is the biggest myth, is people think, oh my god, it's because of my performance. Well, most businesses will just take you through performance management. It's probably a lot cheaper for them to do that. And also, I would say that the other myth is that first in first in, last in, first out, also not really that much of a thing. Like, I do think it probably happens in some businesses, but it's just because you join the business last doesn't mean that you're going to be the first person to be made redundant. And then I think the third thing is that businesses don't want to make their staff redundant. Like, genuinely, they don't, even if they are the most lowest EQ business, not great culture wise. They don't want to lose people, because it's just not nice for anybody, whether you're the person being made redundant or the person that's making someone redundant. It's usually a last resort, and I think people think that they're doing this as a first resort, and it really isn't, in my experience anyway. Do you have anything
Yeah.
to add?
Not really. I think I completely, obviously, I completely agree with those 3 points. But I also think, and I don't know how helpful this is or not, but sometimes when businesses do unfortunately have to make their staff redundant, which they don't really want to do, sometimes you need to go and have a look at the business that you've been made redundant from, because there might be some sort of strategy, they might be selling, because actually a kind of a leaner business is probably a little bit more, I don't know, like appeasing to when people want to buy that such business. So I also think, kind of really feeding into exactly what Charlotte has said, but I think if you want to do something for yourself as well, actually go and have a look into the business and understand there might be some other reasons to why they're doing it.
Yeah, there might be. There's all sorts of reasons, but certainly in my experience, it's usually a last resort because they're trying to save money and
Yeah.
save costs to keep the business going,
Yeah.
as opposed to selling it. That doesn't mean necessarily that that might not be a reason that they're doing it, but typically
Yeah.
it's to keep the business going for as long as possible. And unfortunately, that sometimes means that people have to be laid off, because usually, and I remember working for a very large organization, and they said that their biggest cost base is basically their payroll. And that's probably the same for most businesses.
Yeah. Anything else that we can talk about in regard? I know there's a whole list of things, Charlotte. So steer us. What should we talk about next?
Um, so I guess let's spin it back around to something like positive in terms of the other things that you can do when you've been made redundant. So obviously, you'll have taken some time to think about what it is that you want to do next, and you'll start thinking about applying for jobs. And over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about things like CVs, cover letters, application forms, interviews, etc. But I think there are some other things that you can do, because typically you won't get, unless you're super lucky, right, you're not going to get a job like straight away. Because even if you know somebody who's referenced you into a job, like, you've still got to go through a standard recruitment process, and they usually can take a couple of weeks. So I think, and I've done this, and I think it's good for your mental health to do things like this, is to just not spend all of your time applying for jobs, but to continue to make yourself a well-rounded person. And so, by which I mean, you can do things like enroll in courses. So when I was made redundant most recently, I enrolled in a couple of courses. I've now got a couple of new qualifications. You can volunteer. Again, I've done some voluntary work. You is a great time to get a mentor, because you can use the benefit of their experience to help guide you into what you might want to do next if you're not sure. That's a good reason why you might want a mentor. Or you might want a mentor because you want to pivot into a different career, and they're an expert in that, for example. um, and then also, Lucy will know this, and anybody that is watching this that knows me knows I have a high curiosity profile. But immerse yourself in resources, read books, listen to podcasts, like read industry press, like do everything you can to keep your finger on the pulse, for want of a better phrase, because it will keep you going and give you some sense of routine, because there's only so many jobs you can apply for in a day, and when you are job hunting after being made redundant, it can feel a bit like it's become your full-time job.
Yeah.
And so doing some of these things also are interesting things to talk about when you're being interviewed, and so that you can say, obviously I've been searching for a job during this time, I've been made redundant, but I've also done this and this. And I think it's good for you in terms of your CV and your profile, but also good for you from a mental health perspective. What do you think, or do you have anything to add to that, Lucy?
Yeah, no, completely agree with you. I've got a friend of mine who was recently made redundant, and over the last kind of few months, what she's been doing is exactly what you've just mentioned, and it's really helped her mental well-being, really more than anything. And she said to me, "I feel like I'm applying for jobs all the time." And then I said, "What boundaries do you need to put up around that?" Me being a coach,
I was going to say
obviously,
classic coach there,
classic
Lucy.
coach question. Um, and actually, we came out with actually, if she kept, applying for jobs, she's going to burn out. So she's ended up, because she works in marketing and kind of social media, that space. So she's volunteering for a mental health charity at the moment to do their social
Nice.
platforms. She's been reading more books. She's been working on her personal brand. I'm obviously helping,
Naturally.
naturally. She's been having some coaching, not just via me, but with somebody else as well. And it's really just helping her become exactly what Charlotte said there, that really well rounded person. So then when she does go for interviews and they say, what have you been up to over the last couple of months? She's got probably a list of 50 things that she's been doing. And and I know I said this earlier, but I'm going to say it again. I also want to say, make sure you have time to reflect before you react.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, I think naturally we always go into, oh, sherbet lemons, we need to apply for every single job and burn ourselves out applying for something. But I want you all, if you're going to take something away from this, hopefully you'll take more than just one thing, but give yourself that moment to reflect and then react.
Yeah, I think that kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is whilst it's not personal being
Yeah.
made redundant, it feels it. And I think what you've described is almost sort of like a bit of have a bit of sort of a mourn,
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah.
because people do feel grief from this, and I can
Mm.
tell you that firsthand, but certainly from the first time I was made redundant
Mhm.
anyway. And you know, because you're almost mourning a loss of a part of your identity.
Yeah.
And I know there's lots of stuff out there at the moment that's like, you know, work shouldn't be necessarily all of your identity and part, but try as you might, if you're working full time, certainly, um, you know, it is a big part of your identity because you usually spend more time with the people that you work with than anybody else in your life.
Mm.
So I do agree with the reflection piece, you know, take a couple of days just to be like, oh, this sucks. And then get yourself geared up and ready to redirect and you know, set off on your new opportunity and a new journey.
Yeah. Can I just add something to that
Yeah,
too?
go for it.
And I tell everybody to do this, and I think it's because again I'm a coach. One of the best methods to kind of release and let go of grief or something that's kind of like stuck on your chest is by writing a letter to it, whatever it is. And whether it's a letter of going, "Dear job that made me redundant," or "Dear the feelings that I'm feeling right now," and then write down everything, because what it gave you, what it's giving you learning wise, how you're really feeling. And you can write anything to it. It's just between you and that bit of paper, and you can write anything, swear, let it all out. It could be 10 pages long, it could be 2 sentences long. And then what I want you to then go and do with it, if it is safe to do so, if it is safe to do so, I'm repeating that, is to go outside and burn it. And then and then it's like a release.
But if it's not safe to burn,
Rip it
I
all
guess
up.
crumple it up,
Yeah,
like
rip
rip
it
it
all up.
up. Okay. Don't want any
I
fires on
know.
our hands.
I know.
But that does sound very cathartic, and I
Oh,
imagine that would be a good way to deal
yeah.
with it.
You'll know when you're ready to do it as well. Because sometimes when I offer that as a suggestion to people, they go, "Well, I might do it, I might do it." And then a few months later, they have done it. Then they message me to let me know they've done it. And you have to find your right time to do it.
Yes, and I think that's the same with anything broadly on the topic of careers. You
Mm,
know, everything is unique to you in your career, and only, you know, and you'll have heard me say this a lot, and I say this to a lot of people, the only person that really cares about your career is you. And so
mm,
using that and what you've just said, and even redundancy, that's going to be a unique experience to you, and it's what you do and how you know, cope with it is different from you to me, right? Like
yeah.
it's just different experiences.
Oh,
um
I
I
really
did think,
like that you said that. Sorry, I'm interrupting
oh
you.
no, it's okay,
Because
you go.
something in me just kind of felt like, do you know what? It is an experience. And actually, it's quite a nice, it's not nice, but I think when you've come from it and moved on from it, think of
Yes.
all the learnings that you're going to have in this space now. If you're watching this and you've just been made redundant or laid off and you're thinking, oh goodness, actually, if you think about where you're going to be in the next 6, 12 months' time, think about all the experiences. And I don't know, something in there made me feel a bit like, what an experience.
I think, to add to that, the experience that most people, I'd hope that most people would get from being made redundant is an increased sense of resilience,
Yeah.
because it's something we all strive to have. And I say strive because I don't think anyone's 100% resilient unless, you know, you have zero heart, or your heart is made of stone. Um, but resilience for me definitely is the experience that I take from it. As
Mm,
well, certainly one of the things. But one of the other things I was going to say that I missed from my sort of list of other things to do other than applying for jobs is networking, and we are going to cover that in a couple of weeks' time. But just because you don't have a job doesn't mean that you shouldn't go networking. I did. It was great. You meet other people, you broaden your network. It's another outlet, and also again good to talk to other people, because what you'll find, I think, is that the more people you talk to, the more people will have a redundancy story for you,
yeah.
because it happens to more of us than you realize.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't wait to talk about networking. That's not until like week
Yeah,
5, but networking is my favourite topic I think we're going to talk about.
right. Okay. um So I do have one call to action on redundancy though,
Oh,
and
yes.
this is aimed at hiring managers and talent acquisition people. I read something the other week on LinkedIn, and having spoken to other people, I know that they found this to be true. So in February, March 2020, a whole raft of people got made redundant. Back end of last year into this year, a whole raft of people got made redundant. There are unlucky people like myself who were made redundant in both of those periods. So that's what, two and a bit years, 3 years. So when you look at somebody's CV and you see that they were in a job for a short period of time up around the pandemic, and then again in this most recent time, they're not job hoppers. It is very unlikely they're job hoppers.
Mm.
So my call to action to hiring managers and talent teams, recruitment businesses is look further back, because if they've been in a business prior to those 2 times where they've been made redundant, and lots of people, by the way, won't write on their CV they've been made redundant, they will have likely been in a previous business for several years or many years. So please use some thought and common sense and don't tar them with being job hoppers, because they are just looking for an opportunity to be somewhere that's stable and gives them fulfillment.
Mm.
I will step off my soapbox now, but that's my
No,
call to action.
I think it's a really worthwhile call out, especially if you've seen some of that stuff kind of being posted about. And actually, now you're saying it, I think I've actually seen a few posts around some people when they talk about like their interviews experience or when a recruiter's called them. I think it's a really worthwhile call out. So thanks for sharing that, actually.
It's okay. So have you got anything else you want to share today, Lucy, on redundancy?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot. I think we've already covered a lot in previous conversations as well, which in the comments to this LinkedIn Live, I'll make sure that we've got, Charlotte and I will both make sure that there's the resources that we've talked about, the posts that we talked about, the Talk Female Friday podcast that we've already done on redundancy as well. So for all of you to kind of dive in and have a listen to that. I think what I probably would want people to think about, and Charlotte, I'm just kind of quoting what you said, is that reset and redirect. And I think that's something that I found that quite powerful.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And that reset and redirect will be different lengths of time for different people. Again, I come back to careers are uniquely you, and it'll be different for different people. And we will come on to this when we talk about sort of applying for jobs, etc. But don't panic and just apply for everything, and don't give yourself time to reset. And that might be, a few hours, a day, a week. And I appreciate that not everyone has huge amounts of time to be able to do that, because they need to be able to pay their bills. But it is important to give yourself a minute.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, Charlotte,
Yes.
anything else before I let everyone know what we're going to talk about next week?
No, let's tell everyone. What are we talking about next week? I can't remember.
We are going to be talking about CVs.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So next week, same time, same place. Charlotte and I are going to spend about 30 minutes with a coffee, of course, talking about CVs, resumes, depending on what location that you're in. We're going to do a bit of research beforehand, maybe have some examples to hand, and hopefully that will help you build out your CV. And there is kind of a plan with how we've put the structure of the next 6 weeks together. And I hope that we see you back here next week. And in the meantime, please check out all the comments. Please comment as well and let us know what you thought. If you've got any resources, please share them with us too, so the rest of the audience can see. And I guess what we'll do is we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks.